profitability is just making profits from your operations. Okay, the company's ability to generate profits from its operations. Okay, so from the profitability ratios, we'll start with the margin ratios. The first margin ratio is the gross profit margin. Okay, it's basically telling us how much gross profit you make for every 1 kwacha of sales revenue. Okay, so for example, if you have a gross profit margin of 20%, so that's just telling us for every 1 kwacha that you've made in sales revenue, okay, 20 ngwe, which is 20% of 1 kwacha, 20 ngwe is your gross profit. Alright, so this is the formula here. Gross profit margin is your gross profit over your sales revenue. So we need to understand how this ratio operates. Okay. So if your sales revenue increases, okay, if your sales let's say, for example, let's say we hold gross profit constant. Okay, say okay, the gross profit is constant, right? And your sales revenue increases. What's going to happen is your gross profit margin is going to drop. Why? Because there's a negative relationship between the sales revenue and the gross profit margin. Okay, if gross profit, you assume it's constant. Okay, in real life it cannot be constant. So okay, let me even put it like this: if your sales revenue grows more than your gross profit, your gross profit margin is going to drop. You see? If the sales revenue increases more than the gross profit, okay, your gross profit margin is going to drop. Why? Because there's a inverse relationship between these two variables here. Okay, there's an inverse relationship. We can see this. Let's give up for an example here. Let's say this is your year 1. Year 2. Okay, so let's say this is your gross profit, put it as a gross profit, and we've got sales revenue. Okay, so let's say sales revenue is 1,000, gross profit is 100 kwacha here. Okay. Then in year 2, let's say your gross profit is just maybe from 100 kwacha, it's 110. Sales revenue is 2,000. Okay, sales revenue has increased, it's doubled basically to 2,000. Gross profit has just increased by 110. Let's see what happens with the gross profit margin. Okay, so just remember, with these ratios, the denominator, if the denominator increases more than the numerator, the ratio is going down. Okay. So here, let's see what happens to our gross profit margin. So, gross profit margin, GPM. Oh, here. Gross profit margin, GPM. Gross profit divided by sales revenue. So in year 1, it's 100 divided by 1,000, it's 0.1, okay, which is 10%, which is just telling us for every 1 kwacha that you make, 10 ngwe is your gross profit. Right. Let's look at year 2. Okay, let's say 110 divided by 2,000. you're going to get a gross profit margin of 0.055. Okay, 0.055. Okay. So have you seen here? This is that's 5.5%. So if you make a one quarter in sales revenue, just say 0.5 or 5.5% times one quarter, you make 5 ingwe. 5 ingwe basically as your gross profit for every one quarter in sales revenue. So here we've seen, colleagues, that if your sales revenue increases, it surpasses your gross profit in growth, in terms of growth, your gross profit margin is going to drop. Okay? So basically what it's telling you is you're going to be making less gross profit for every sales. That's how you interpret a drop in gross profit margin. You're making less gross profit for every sale that you make. Okay? So for a company, it's good that sales increase, okay, but remember that sales revenue, your sales can increase, but how much of that sales revenue are you keeping? That's where the secret is. Because remember, that sales revenue, you're not going to keep all of that money. There will be costs that will start coming in. Okay? Like costs of goods sold. Because remember, your gross profit GP sales revenue minus the cost of goods sold. Okay. So that's it. The sales revenue, it can look good, it can make a very huge amount of sales revenue. But this profitability rate wants to know, out of that sales revenue, how much have you taken as gross profit? Okay? Yes. Then also we need to remember, we have to also look at the mechanics of gross profit also. Okay? Using this formula here for gross profit, and so gross profit is equal to sales minus cost of goods sold. Right? If cost of goods sold rise, okay, even way more than sales, your gross profit can go down. And if your gross profit goes down, you're making less gross profit for every sale that you make. Okay? So cost of goods sold is also one factor you have to look at when you're looking at this ratio here, because it's going to have an effect on this gross profit. Okay, as we can see here, if we looked at our example here, gross profit grew from 100 to 110. In such a case there, you see that, okay, cost of goods sold should have dropped. That's why gross profit has increased. Okay. The only thing that was just a disadvantage is that the sales revenue grew more than the gross profit. Okay. And if your sales revenue increases more than your cost of goods sold, you make more gross profit. Okay. So when you're analyzing this ratio, these are the angles you need to look at. Okay. Find out the growth of the sales revenue versus the growth of the gross profit. Okay. If your gross profit grows more than your sales revenue, okay, the gross profit increases more than the sales revenue, you have the opposite effect. Okay. The gross profit margin is going to drop. Okay, it's going to increase actually. Okay, the gross profit margin will increase if your gross profit has outgrown your sales revenue, which would be the best case scenario. Then your company is actually doing better. Okay. Yes. Any questions, colleagues? So those are the angles you have to look at when you're dealing with this gross profit margin. If you see a drop in it, go and look first. Go and see it. Gross profit, how much did it grow by? Did it grow? Did it also drop? Because even if when gross profit also drops, the gross profit margin expected also to drop. Okay. the gross profit, look at the sales revenue, and look at the cost of goods sold. One of these three variables is going to tell you the story for you to interpret. Okay. So my next question that I need to ask you is, colleagues, how can a business lower its cost of goods sold? Because as you're making a ratio analysis, you need to interpret these things. Okay? So, how do you lower your cost of goods sold? Do you remember the elements that form the part of the cost of goods sold? Okay, this is where you have to remember also some accounts and everything. What you learned in financial accounts. So yes, Mr. Miller, how does a company lower its cost of goods sold? Because this one is a major culprit for making gross profit margins drop. If you find cost of goods sold increases, okay, more than even the sales revenue, your gross profit will drop. And if your gross profit drops, your gross profit margin also drop. Meaning how much gross profit you are making from each one purchase sale is going to drop. Okay? Always remember, that's how you should be thinking of the gross profit margin. How much gross profit you are keeping for every one quarter that you make in a sale. Yes, Madam Ruth, how would the company drop its cost of goods sold? Okay, majority of cost of goods sold it deals with inventory, raw materials. If you're a manufacturer, right? Then if you're a seller, the inventory will be the goods you resell. Okay. So if the, for example, if the price of the raw materials increases, okay, it means the cost of goods sold is also going to increase. Okay, because remember, if you remember the trading account in accounts, inventory plus purchases, then you make adjustments for if there are any carriage inwards, carriage outwards, carriage inwards and return outwards. Then you deduct the closing inventory also. That's how you get your cost of goods sold. So inventory, raw materials, they can be is a big factor of cost of goods sold. Okay. If the raw materials get expensive, expect also the cost of goods sold to increase. Okay. So one way is finding a new supplier of cheaper raw materials to use. But remember, not affecting quality of the product. Because if you just go for something cheap and it affects the quality of your product, that's even worse. Okay. So as a business, if you see the cost of goods sold is increasing, you also need to increase your selling price so that you can keep more gross profit for each sale that you make. Okay. You need to increase your selling price. If the situation is a global event where now raw materials that you get that become expensive, it's something you cannot control, then as a business you see that, okay, these raw materials become expensive, so what can we do? We need to increase our selling price then so to stay profitable. Okay. Yes, so the inventory costs make a big part of the cost of goods sold. Okay. That's the thing, that's the major component you are managing when you're dealing with gross profit margin, cost of goods sold. This is where maybe you can have some control. Even sales, if sales, to increase your sales revenue, it means you need to advertise more, Okay, make your product readily available. Okay, so even that department, the sales department is also failing, then sales revenue will drop. Okay, so sales revenue and these costs are things that the companies have to try to control or have an influence. Try to boost sales so that your revenue increases, and also try to lower cost of goods sold. Okay, because as I said, an increase in sales doesn't mean that you're keeping more gross profit, which may now they be keeping less. Okay, so if your sales revenue is increasing, as a company also aim for your gross profit to increase so that you're keeping more of it. Because as we saw here, the sales revenue increased and our margins still dropped. Okay, our gross profit also increased, but sales revenue outpaced it. Okay. So a higher gross profit margin, better. Okay. A lower gross profit margin,